Hi, Steve. Great to have you on board again. So I think this must be your second, I think it's second or third time on the Fireside Chat. So great to have you on in the seat, as it were. I think it's really important to see how your journey's been because I think lots of people in EdTech, there's lots of people moving from one post to another. In fact, I've never known an industry where you keep on bumping into the same people in lots of different sort of companies, but that's great in some ways. Um, so I think it'd be really interesting to sort of hear a little bit between your move, because I know you've obviously moved away from West Country Business Services or WCBS, and now have moved to Esenda in the last year or so. So it'd be really interesting to see, where that journey's been.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, great to be here. I think you're right. It's my second or third time, probably third. But yeah, I always enjoy the conversation. So yeah, always great to have a chat. Yeah, you're right. So previously I was CEO of WCBS, primarily a finance business for independent international schools, but also offered MIS and admissions. And again, had that sort of that interesting challenge of being a product and a service and a business that's been around for a long period of time, decent market share, to then moving to that next generation platform and how you really stay ahead of the game. And they have some really interesting vision there and products with the hub suite of solutions, taking that next generation cloud native platform again purely for that independent and international school market. But left there back end of last year. So I had a period of garden leave just before, but actually finished up end of the year. And I've now joined Ascender. So known Esenda for a number of years, super interesting business, payment aggregating business effectively. So rather than being an MIS or a finance system where they're quite large change management projects, lots of different stakeholders, quite high ticket items typically that can take quite a while to move through that sales process, we're solving a much narrower problem, much more niche solution. But in my opinion, can have probably greater impact actually, especially when I think about the independent school market and some of the challenges that they've had, whether that is VAT coming on private school fees, whether it's just losing the business rates that they're now having to pay and the additional cost burden that they have. That sort of very much fits in with what I was talking about when I was with WCBS and schools being underserved by technology companies and that need to really push that innovation like we've seen in the consumer world and certainly in fintech with the likes of Monzo, Starling, Revolut, and Free Trade and how they've really improved that user experience and got rid of any technical debt and
Mm.
changed the tone of voice with how they communicate with people. I think that opportunity is still right there with the education market. Uh, and with Ascender, we can really help these schools during this challenging time, specifically looking at the independent market at the moment. We do operate in other sectors as well, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But in that one, where they're having to become more commercial to fight some of the challenges that are hitting them, sort of the macro environment, the VAT, the business rates, etc. We can really help those schools improve their security, provide a better user experience to their parents, become more efficient, save some money, and actually with a much quicker change management project than we had with the likes of an MIS or a finance system, which is a little bit more involved. So quite nice to be able to have those quick wins that make a meaningful impact for schools.
Yeah, no, amazing. And I think, you're right. We definitely should get on with get on to the different segments that you work in as well, because I think that's really, really important to understand. Because I think there's that whole difference between you know, one size fits all, one stop shop, all those sort of products, that normally, are within the MIS market. The MIS market is all that enterprise sort of style sort of solutions and those, very much more sort of niche products that meet a particular need. But just before we go on to that, I'm quite interested, especially again, going back to, I think there's lots of, people moving within the industry, and, maybe some new people who have moved up a step and gone into that sort of C-suite level. It'd be interesting to get your take on, that first, especially seeing it's, reasonably recent in the sense of a year or so, but what that take is on, how do you prepare to go into that CEO role, and what are the things that you start to consider when you sort of looked at Ascender? Did you break it down to where you thought the challenges were, or did you have other objectives, I guess, that you wanted to try and achieve?
Yeah, good question. So I actually had a couple of options when I was looking, both at the same sort of level, but I really liked Ascender for many reasons. One, I know payments. I think we can have the most impact in the market, and that was the primary driver. But in terms of when you come in, I think you come in with a set of assumptions, and the reality is always quite different. So when I looked to join Esenda, I thought that we were very much an education specific business, solving the payment requirements for independent schools. That was primarily it. With the opportunity to move internationally because we're seeing the same challenges over there, and we had a splattering of customers in Europe and the Middle East as well. However, on joining, you start to then, really get under the hood and you look at maybe some of the things that you knew you'd have to do, the basic stuff like policies, procedures, process, all of that thing, just to sort of take it from where it is now to where you want to get in the future. But also seeing the wider opportunity and how we're not just an education business. So yes, we
Mm.
start in education and we're education focused, and that's primarily where our business plan is focused. However, we have lots of opportunities and now clients in the likes of the healthcare and social housing space as well. So they have similar challenges, niche but significant markets that you're using sort of CRM style solutions. And I say CRM in the same sort of words as an MIS in an independent school.
Yeah.
And they're bespoke to those markets and they're generating a lot of invoices. And those invoices need to be paid, but they're just plugging in commodity payment solutions, whether that's a Stripe, a Go Cardless, a WellPay, whoever it might be. And actually, there's no real integration that goes there. There's no reconciliation into the CRM system. There's not that many payment options. Often it's quite expensive. The CRM provider isn't having that as a revenue stream typically. It's just being outsourced. So there is real opportunity to go and disrupt in that space. And that's certainly one of the things that we've seen that there is a lot of opportunity outside of what we considered our core market. So one of the challenges there is don't get too distracted, focus on what you do and do that really well. But actually for me on joining, and whilst I've known Ascender for a number of years, and it was founded by a chap called Bertie Simpson, still in the business today, done a great job taking the business to where it is. And he was a student at Millfield School, understood the problem that, well, one, he didn't want to go to university on leaving school, ended up trading foreign exchange in the city. And they were like, well, why should we hire you? So, well, hold on, the school I went to had a lot of international children. What if I was to sign up all the parents and got them to pay their school fees to the platform? Great idea. Go ahead and do that. Now, that's a really challenging task to do in reality because how do you know who the parents are? How do you know what school the child's going to? You're going to have to KYC the parents. It was just, yes, there's a problem, but maybe that wasn't the right way to approach it. But quickly understood that for the schools, they were getting, let's say it was £10,000 for the term, they would end up with £9,722 or whatever it might be in their bank account. The parent's name was different to the child's name. It didn't reconcile in with the finance system or the invoice system. And there was just a general headache, but it was sort of a 12% headache. So 12% of independent school children are international. Typically at that point, that was the case. So yes, it was a headache for those schools, but it was probably a 1 day a month headache. So if you were really commercially minded and forward thinking, you were like, yes, I'm going to do it. But for the majority of them, they've got other fires that they're putting out. They were under-resourced departments, and it was how do you get that to become top of the priority list? And so that was sort of a couple of years ago when the business pivoted. So whilst the business is 5 or 6 years old, I would say in reality it's sort of 18 months to 2 years old is when they understood that the opportunity is to become a full stack payment provider. And Ascender is the only full stack payment provider for independent international schools, frankly, for education. And what I mean by that is they do direct debits and backs payments, they do open banking, card payments, and foreign exchange all in one platform for both inbound and outbound payments. So that's your fee collection in, but maybe also supplier and payroll payments going out. And on doing that, the business really sort of gained product market fit. So, previously it might have been doing a couple of £1 million in foreign exchange volume and solving some interesting problems, but it was very niche.
Mm.
To then going, actually, this with a full stack becomes really interesting for schools. They can genuinely save time because they're managing one system rather than multiple systems. Parents are getting a better user experience because they're having to go to one place, not multiple places to make a payment. It's more secure because you can move bank details off invoices and just use secure payment links. It's automatically reconciling in with the finance system. So again, saving more time. And it was sort of win-win-win across the value chain. And that went then from doing a couple of million a month to they processed 405 million in all of 2024. And this year alone, we've done 850 million in the first sort of 7.5, 8 months of this year. We'll
Wow.
process somewhere between 1.5 and 2 billion by year end. So, as I said, business has been around a while, but the last sort of 18 months, 2 years is what I would consider found real product market fit and solving genuine problems for our customers where it is sort of win-win-win across the value chain without expensive setup fees, without long sales cycles, just quite a quick change management project and reaping those rewards quite swiftly on the back of it. So that's been really nice to see. And with that's come quite a lot of challenge. So going back to your original question is what do you do when you first start and what were your sort of the challenges you have moving into that role? Now, we went on a funding round. So as soon as I joined, we started the funding process. So we were looking at sort of pre-Series A raise. So we'll probably look at doing a Series A in about 18 months' time. That's roughly the plan, although won't be needed from a cash flow perspective. And anyway, we've just raised £1 million, just literally closed off at the moment. Oversubscribed round, we looked at 500,000 and we raised £1 million, which is super interesting, which will enable us to do a few other things, a couple of exclusives, things like going for a FCA regulated e-money license, which will just provide us with a little bit more flexibility in terms of what we want to do and provide us with some additional revenue streams.
Mhm.
So we've just done that, and that was an interesting process in its own right. So nothing comes quickly with funding, as you're probably well aware, as that was everything from pitch decks to investor presentations to due diligence. But I have to say it was probably one of the best starts that I could have had to the business because you really get under the hood with all of that. So yeah, that was great to do. And then everything that I thought, like my strategy document that I wrote when I first joined, is wildly different now to to what it was then, just because of the opportunity that you then see and the different revenue streams that we now have. Rather than just being a pure payments business, we're looking at some other options, as I said, like being regulated. What does that actually do, and does that open up some alternative revenue streams, and equally for different verticals, whether that's healthcare or social housing, that we've also gained quite a bit of interest in. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey outside of the normal 30, 60, 90-day plans that I'm sure everybody puts in place and writes beforehand and throws out the window after the first 30 days because everything's changed. But yeah, no, so it's been really good. So we raised a decent amount of cash, and that was sort of a baptism of fire to really understand all of that. We've also gone through the process of sort of growing up. I'd probably describe it, probably a little bit unfairly actually, but the easiest way to describe it, going from a startup that's doing some interesting things to finding product market fit to now processing hundreds of millions of pounds in payments and having to deal with all of that process, policy, and procedure that fits around it. Right. So that's been a big part of the last sort of 8 months or so.
Oh
Not to
man.
mention our branding and website and all of those things that is so out of date compared to where we are at the moment, although you will see a whole new refresh coming for the beginning of September.
It feels like if I was going to summarize all that is adapt, adapt to your circumstances because it sounds like there's so much going on in the business in the sense of looking at all the different opportunity that you can see. So obviously you start off in the sort of independent segment, but in school in education as well, and now you're sort of breaching out into other places like NHS, like say healthcare, or, and other maybe even fintech at some point. So it sounds like you have to keep on adapting. It sounds like you basically maybe even had an idea of what you wanted to do at the beginning, but it sounds like the business itself was at that point and ready to grow quick, and you had to basically be the person be able to still sort of steer the ship, as it were, but in a way that adapted to the I suppose the need and the opportunity that's out there.
Yeah, I think we're very much education focused. We see that as our core market and where we really want to go deep and solve those problems, whether that is with partners, and we typically are a B2B2C business, so we don't tend to go direct to schools. We tend to go in via our partners, where we
Hmm.
can add value to their product and stop them effectively from, in some cases, reselling a commodity solution or solutions is more often the case, or nothing at all, but actually enabling those invoices that they're producing from their billing systems to have a sort of the last mile payment piece that does everything which they can't get from anywhere else in one piece, and sort of rounding out their offering to schools. So I think that's absolutely key. Yeah, you're right in terms of adapting, and yes, we do have these opportunities in other spaces that we're doing some stuff with, but only where it's complementary to the tech that we've already built. And in a lot of those, it is almost identical. Somebody's paying on behalf of somebody else. And it's again a niche but significant market where it requires some relationships and some deeper integration with the, I say CRM provider in that world, but or the MIS or billing system provider in the education world.
And I'm guessing it doesn't have to be stuck to the independent sector at all. Like you say, if you work with partners, then actually the maintain sector is just as important in the sense of really, I think lots of the needs are becoming similar anyway. You obviously there's parents who need to pay for equipment, or it could even be leasing of grounds, or even the general public around the school or the community might potentially want to pay, start leasing out facilities as well. And then
Yeah,
on top
no,
of that, you've got, so your customer still is, a parent, well, you say parent, but it could be anybody in the community. And then, which is the same with independent schools in some ways, because it can be the MOD, it can be anybody who's paying some of these bills, and vice versa. When it comes to solving the efficiencies, that's just school. I'd say just that's really, really not the word I wanted to use, but the efficiencies within the school is really needed in the sense of a lot of the people within the office and managing this, let's face it, I think, and we've spoken about it before, there's been a lot of inefficiencies in the past through the software they've been using or even the processes potentially.
yeah, no, that's right. And we are actually doing some things in the maintain sector. So as I said, we typically started off in independent schools, and that's where we saw our core market. Fee paying really, because it was about paying of those invoices. And we'll be doing a fair bit more in Europe and the Middle East, sort of end of this year and early next year as well. But we will be in quite a few hundred, if not over 1,000, maintained schools for sort of January of 2026. That's all happening. But again, our goal is not to be, we're not a software provider as such.
Mm.
We're a payment aggregation platform. So we would happily work with all these other people that are building out the basket functionality and they want to maintain those parental eyeballs, but rather than passing off to a Stripe for some card payments or a Go Cardless for some direct debits or something else for foreign exchange or nothing at all where that's concerned, we can bring all of that together, provide them with a compliant last mile that's super simple to integrate. We can take on a lot of that legwork to provide a deeper, smoother integration that is a better user experience for their parents, and still enable them to do all what they do really well and maintain those parental eyeballs, but just not have to worry about the payments piece. So they can get all of the different payment options under one roof effectively with a much tighter, more meaningful relationship, and potentially have a sort of a cost-free revenue stream on the back of it, which they may not have been having previously.
Which I'm guessing they can choose to either give back to school or take as revenue and themselves.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from our perspective, we would never be more expensive than whatever else is out there, typically less anyhow. So the goal is to reduce the costs for schools, but just not pay as much of that to the likes of Visa and MasterCard if we can help it.
The revolutionary
Something
in
like
there.
that.
And I guess that means if you were going to have an ask, then I'm guessing companies that basically are already doing payment or trying to do payments, your differentiator is that you'll handle that whole piece yourselves, but at the same time, potentially reduce down their costs.
Yeah, exactly. So anybody that was doing payments, maybe they're plugging into a different acquiring bank. So it might be a Lloyd's, it might be Elavon, just as some examples, could be WorldPay, could be anybody for that matter. So look, do it through us. We can streamline that sort of onboarding process for you. We can provide you with multiple different payment options. Go deeper on the integration because it's meaningful to us, as opposed to it being a commoditized product in a mass market for these companies that are already doing billions and trillions of pounds of payments, to provide a much better integration, better user experience, and more competitive rates for the customer,
Hmm.
with an element of a revenue share potentially back on those for sort of managing the payments processing.
And in relation to the business itself, so you know to sort of generate some of those efficiencies, obviously you've got the relationship with the banks, I'm assuming, or the merchant banks.
Mhm.
What are you basically starting to think about how you utilize things like AI in your business and or are you looking at seeing how that can help with with your customer base in the sense of giving them a better experience in the sense of the payment systems?
Yeah, so again, I think AI is here to stay. I think that's the first thing to say. A year or so ago, I think people may have had a slightly different view or were skeptical about its value. I think it's proving quite quickly, and we've seen with the likes of, I think Lovable is the one that everyone's been talking about, 0 to 100 million in revenue in 9 months. I think it was. I think again, there's a lot of companies out there that have got big R&D budgets to explore AI, and therefore we're getting a real pop for that at the moment. Be interested to see what retention rates look like going forward. But in terms of us and AI, yeah, we're using it for sure. A lot of it is about improving our pace at the moment, I guess. So on the development side, whether that is for some market research, whether it is writing first drafts of code that gets you 80% of the way there, whether it's doing an element of testing. So I think there's lots of things like that that we're doing from an efficiency point of view.
Hmm.
I think there's a danger of going all in on AI as well from a communication perspective. It can feel a bit soulless. So I'm quite keen that we maintain a human touch, and being personal is a big part of our sort of branding and key different differentiator. So rather than being like one of these big corporates, a WellPay or a Stripe for that matter, where you're probably just a number, how can we be a meaningful partner for whether that's the parent, the school, or a sort of billing system provider? So yeah, we're absolutely using it for all those efficiency gains at the moment. I think there's a lot that can be done with predictive analysis in the future, and using AI, probably more so in the MIS space. I think that's really interesting with some of the things that can go on there as opposed to the payments. But the sort of things that we're looking at with the payments that we can do is a lot of that data we have is sort of anonymized and aggregated across the platform, and we can see how quickly people might pay. What if somebody cancels a direct debit? What is the impact of that having? How quickly do you recollect it? So if we could present that information quicker to them with an automated follow up to a parent, so I guess automation rather than AI, but triggered through the platform based on some learnings that we're seeing might be quite interesting.
Yeah, I can easily see the combination um of the finance information that you have and the MIS information. Actually, you combine them both. There would be definitely some trends there in the sense of if somebody's I'm probably going to give a bit of a negative example, but if there was a child where the parents broke up and that sort of stuff, then you probably would start to understand, payment system, where the payments might be delayed, and that might then have another trigger in the sense of, how do you support that child? Because that normally
Yeah.
would show that basically there's some disruption between, in the family in the sense of it's, fragmented a little bit. But yeah,
Yeah.
you can see it all coming together.
So I think the data analytics and what you can do with that data, and AI just makes it easier, right?
Mm.
So easier to pull out the insights for that, easier to do the automation to actually put that meaningful insight back to the end user that requires it, whether it is a direct debit that's been cancelled, and understanding that that typically takes 3 months from somebody cancelling a direct debit to you retrying in 7 days, not collecting again, then picking up the phone to them not answering. Eventually, you get through to them 3 or 4 weeks later, resetting it up, recollecting. All of these sorts of things I think can just be improved with automation, data analytics, sort of stroke AI, maybe even offering them alternative payment methods. But then, as you say, as you can aggregate all of that together with alternative sources, then I think you can do some really interesting predictive analysis, which will hopefully have a meaningful impact on the child and their learning and the outcomes that you can bring to them.
Yeah. Do you think you would ever go as far as because schools also, as we all know, the taking or adding VAT onto private schools, schools in the maintained sector definitely are finding financial struggles. Do you think there's an element of that AI to support, and it's probably going to sound wrong when I say it rather than in reality it's probably the right thing. But if you can basically ensure that basically parents are buying the right things. So as an example, have they got the uniform? Are they buying it from you rather than trying to get it somewhere else? Is there ways that you can help them save money potentially? But that brings finance back into the schools even if you're independent or in the maintained sector, which both need. Is that something where you think is you could see happening down the line, or do you think that schools will try and stay away from that?
No, I think anything that they can do to try and make life easier for their parents has got to be a good thing, and to stop the questions coming into the school office, right? So if you can make sure that that parent is presented with the right stuff that's appropriate for their child, not appropriate for little Johnny in the other class, for instance, then that has to be a good thing. And again, this sort of technology makes all of that so much easier to do. Unique experience per child, as opposed to a one size fits all.
Yeah, it's that sort of Amazon approach, really. I know we're all sort of go, oh God, I get sold to, but actually, they're normally in most cases offering you something that you do need or want. So
Yeah.
in most cases, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think what will also be interesting is you've probably seen it with the likes of Klarna. I think they got rid of quite a lot of their SaaS products that they have. Will we see some of those sort of commodity SaaS stroke MIS plays start to become more personalized because they can use AI to make it more relevant for their school and their individual processes? So rather than it being around scalability, is it supportable, and people moving away from bespoke software and going to a company that can provide it en masse, is there going to be something that says, actually, I don't need that anymore because with AI, I can get it to do and customize it exactly how I want it to work that's right for my school? I think that's an interesting play. I don't know what that means for some of these SaaS companies, but I definitely think I could see a world where we have more customizable, bespoke software as opposed to big platforms that are sort of one size fits all.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the individualized experience, and that can either be at learning, finance, anything to do with education, getting to an individualized experience for the parent or for the child. It seems like when you look at Send as an example, at the moment, one of the biggest problems really is that, that everyone's collected together in a, there's no individualized sort of thinking about that child and what are all the needs potentially. And as soon as you can get to individualized learning where you don't really care if it's dyslexia or gifted and talented. There's just a need in the sense of how do you get the child to be, or progress or be the best that they possibly can. And that's all you care about. Then that's where I think AI can support for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, stops any child getting left behind.
And children getting being if they're gifted and talented,
True.
helping them thrive, I think is really important for sure.
Yeah.
In relation to your business, then, do you think so? Lots of companies, especially outside of education, are starting to sort of when they employ, are starting to sort of talk about how if you haven't got those AI skills, then actually, it's well, basically they're not they're basically only looking for people with AI skills like prompting skills or if you're, so if you're a good developer, that's all good, well and good, but you need to be really strong at prompting as well from an AI perspective. And in some cases, you see it like with WhatsApp and places like that, where they're going, the first place they're looking for is can AI do this job? And then the second part is then if we can't, then we'll basically try and look to employ somebody. Do you think that's going to happen more and more in businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we talked about it before this started recording actually about the development side of things and the role of AI. Will it replace the whole lot of it? No, I don't think so. Certainly not at this point. But does it do a really good job of a junior developer if you've got the right skill set as a medium senior dev that can prompt it in the right way? Yeah, absolutely, it does today. And that's only going to get more powerful. And I think certainly from our perspective, when we're doing job descriptions and we're looking for new hires, AI is one of those sorts of skills that we're asking for now, alongside general office skills,
Yeah.
PowerPoint, Microsoft, and a lot of that sort of goes out the window a little bit if you can use AI effectively. So yeah, definitely something that we would expect from people. I think there's still an element of what do we actually expect from them, in terms of AI? Yes, good prompting, but do we have a AI toolkit that we're using internally that is absolutely nailed on? That we use this for PowerPoint or for pitch decks, for instance. We use this for our sales demos. I think we're still going on that journey actually at the moment, and we use probably a range of tools. And I could see that consolidating down slightly to the ones that we find most usable.
Yeah. Yeah, man. So last two questions, if that's all right. So the first one I'd like to ask is if there was a request, if you were to request from anybody, what would you like to see change in EdTech at the moment? Because I think there's lots going on, and No, actually, I was going to say, and with the sort of AI twist on it, but I'm not going to say that at all. I'm going to leave you to think about what you would request. And the second thing is, from your perspective, where do you see Ascender going after, from this point onwards? What's your next 2 to 3 year vision? I know
Yeah,
that's
so
hard. A big
yeah, I can
question.
remember the
Sorry.
questions.
And two
So
big questions which I didn't tell you I was going to ask.
no, indeed. So my biggest request actually is consistent with all our conversations that we have is I genuinely feel that schools have been underserved by technology companies for a really long time. And there's a host of reasons behind that. You don't often get a lot of seed capital that comes into the space because schools are enterprise grade clients. Therefore, they require sophisticated solutions that do the full functionality set, not like a consumer world where, the likes of Monzo could do a basic app without an IBAN, for instance, and people loved it because the user experience was great and they used emojis on their customer support and, all of those things, even if it had something that was maybe quite major missing. You couldn't go into a school with an MIS that didn't take attendance, for instance,
Hmm.
and people go, that's great. The world has moved on. So it's definitely enterprise software, but without the enterprise budgets. We've all talked about it. Schools have been squeezed from a budgetary perspective, whether that is independent or maintained sector. So as a result, you don't get that seed capital coming in because equally the buying cycles are quite long. So whilst they're very sticky customers and great business to be had, if your average fund cycle is 5 to 7 years, if it takes someone to go and build a new bit of enterprise software that's going to disrupt, let's say, the MIS space, that's probably 3 to 5 years worth of development. At that point, you might land your first one to handful of customers because they're risk adverse typically as well, and rightly so.
Yeah.
Um, and then the fund's got to flip again. So all that investment that's gone up front, then they've got to flip without realizing a huge amount of value at that point. So I think generally that sort of macro um, environment has made it quite hard for a lot of seed capital to come into edtech. And as a result, we've seen a lot of bootstrap companies that have done some remarkable jobs, solved some really big problems. But as the schools have grown, the software's grown as well. So that what they now do is so much larger than what it was when they started 20 years ago, which puts that barrier much higher for other companies to come in and do so, unless they have significant capital, which, as I just said, is really hard to come by in the edtech space. So as a result, schools are the ones that are left dealing with typically outdated software, poorly architected solutions, or at least not poorly architected, poor architected in a way that was fit for a time, but not necessarily for all the things that have been added onto it over the last 10 or 15 years now. User experiences aren't maybe as sophisticated as what you might like, or sophisticated, or um,
Up to date, even.
yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, just they're just not as slick as maybe you're used to in your personal life. So I think that's the shame. So my biggest request would be how can we generate more seed capital that comes into the edtech space that solves some of these problems really meaningfully and deeply. And AI might just be the answer to that. So you said you weren't going to put that flip in it, but actually from what we said around the SaaS piece, the biggest problem before was the speed at which you could develop one of these enterprise solutions. Now, there's a train of thought that says with AI, enterprise solutions will not command the same value that they do today. I don't know the answer to that, but if you could all of a sudden develop it in a few hours by with the right prompts or putting something in compared to a few years, that might, really change the game for a lot of that. And I think if that leads to better solutions for schools that are more personalized for their way of working, that can deliver better outcomes for students, I'm all for that.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So yeah, building an enterprise solution quickly by using AI, like say food, like Lovable or somewhere like that, that is definitely the possible. I think it gets, at the moment with AI, as we were actually discussing before this, but they sort of gets you to 80%. So you still need to basically put a bit of effort into the last 20%. But I agree. I think, it now is definitely creating a baseline for, it's the same when you write documents or templates or contracts or anything. You can easily get a baseline that you work from. Yeah, the one piece of advice I'd always give anybody is don't take whatever you get and just run with it and think it's done and complete. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's definitely a danger, isn't it? It writes it so beautifully, you think it must be right.
yeah, that is definitely not the thing to do at all. Yeah, and what about with Ascender then? Where do you see Ascender going for the next in the next 2 to 3 years? What's your plans?
Yeah, well, our plans are fairly grand, if I'm honest. So yeah, we have a big vision for the business. We're looking to really solve the payments piece, right? So we want to partner with everybody. We're system agnostic as far as that is concerned. Focus on our niche, do our niche really, really well. Solve genuine problems for our customers, whether that is the end user, so a parent in the educational world, by providing them with more options to pay, a more secure experience that is unique to them and their school, to the school then saving a load of time because they can aggregate all their payments into one place and not having to manage multiple different systems, to freeing up that time to do other things, whether it's chasing parents, if the case may be, stopping them from getting any phishing attacks because they're removing those bank details from invoices, improving their cash flows and revenue assurance because if someone can't pay by one option, they can give them another. So no direct debit, for instance, you might want to present them with a credit card. Now you don't want to do that up front because credit card fees are obviously higher than bank transfer or direct debit fees. But if
Mm.
that's the difference between getting the cash and not getting the cash, then that might be beneficial. It might work well for everybody. And then equally for our partners, being able to provide them with a compliant solution that offers more functionality than what they're able to get elsewhere in one place rather than multiple places, that potentially has a meaningful revenue stream for them, becomes really interesting. So what does that then mean for us? We will hopefully process 1.5 to 2 billion pounds of payments this year. We're well on track to do that, and I think we'll be more at the 2 billion as opposed to the 1 billion. Um, we're currently in about 10% of all UK independent schools. So over the next two or three, it'd be nice to be in sort of 40 or 50% of those. We've got a few new product launches that we're doing, such as credit. So I think that's quite interesting, rounding out the loop from pure payment plays to actually looking at how you might be able to spread the cost of that payment outside of the child's life cycle at the school. And that should come in sort of 2026. And then to building a highly profitable business that is a market leader within this space, but also within a couple of the other verticals that we're starting to get involved in, such as healthcare and social housing. And I think if we can do that, we can move quite quickly because we are the only company at the moment that is doing sort of the full stack. And it is win-win-win across the value chain. So hopefully that means that we can build lots of partnerships, and we're already working with a number of partners, where we can grow quite quickly and quite leanly.
Excellent, amazing. And I appreciate your time, and I apologize because we are a little bit over, we've run over a little bit of the time that we had, partly to do with the conversation before we even started recording. But but I do appreciate your time, and it's amazing. So I think the summary for me is, ultimately, I think when you first go into a business, definitely be adaptable. If you're taking up that sort of higher level sort of CEO role, then be adaptable. Make sure that you're ready to, even though you may have some ideas, but actually, like all well-formed ideas, you need to be prepared for change and difference because most of it, let's face it, all best laid plans always normally change. So be adaptable and ready to change to the needs of the business. I think the other thing is, and I know you didn't quite say this, but I think for all schools, I think I'll be challenging your supplier and saying, regarding when it comes to payments, is there a different plan? Is there something that basically can be done differently for you as a school, as much as if you're a provider, you should also be looking at your payment providers and seeing, challenging them and seeing if is there a better way? Don't just go, do you know what, I'm going to go for one of these products because ultimately they're they're I don't know they're market agnostic in the sense of they're around the big names. We should just go for it. Actually look around and make sure you do look for the best solution for your business and see if there's some different options are out there. And finally, I think when it comes to AI, don't trust it 100%, but it is here to stay. And to be honest with you, it's going to basically drive a lot of business. It's going to, if you're in the education market and you're not already thinking about AI or don't have an AI strategy or don't have a vision about how you're going to use this now and into the future, mainly to benefit your customer experience, but also to create those efficiencies internally, then you are putting yourself at a disadvantage, I think. So I think those are probably the three big things. Apart from your vision, Steve, I know you're going to take over the world from a payments perspective. So basically, everyone needs to look at Ascender probably now.
Yeah, no, that was great, Nick. Thank you very much. Enjoyed the chat and pretty good summary there. You got it all
Excellent.
all in there.
Thanks a lot, Steve, and I'll see you and talk to you soon, I hope.
Yeah, cheers, Nick. All the best.